So this is a pretty contrived example, but here's what I want to do. I would like to take this string that contains people's names, and there could be more than one set of names, but each name is separated by a comma, and each person could have a multi-word name. What I want to do is I want to take each person's name, and I want to abbreviate it to a set of initials and a last name. So this person would be G dot. Actually, I shouldn't need to write this. It's this. I would like this result. I would like to take every name except the last one and abbreviate it to just an initial. So I want to take the contents of the first name after the first letter and delete them. The way I can achieve this with regular expressions is I can go searching for the interior part of the first name. So I know that, okay, this is the part I want to get rid of. It's everything after that capital letter and before the space. And it has to be followed by a last name. Otherwise, it's not a first name. And so I want to ignore this capital letter. I want to ignore the last name. I just want to pull out this bit in the middle. But I know that if I want to write a pattern that finds just the interior of the first name, I will have to include information about that capital letter and the last name. And if we look back at that example from previously with the table cells, something similar was going on. What I wanted ultimately was the number inside the TD tag. That's what I came up with at the end. And I used grouping to isolate that. I don't care about the TD tag itself, but I needed to put that in my pattern to make it clear to the regular expression engine where I was expecting my match to occur. So I put it in my pattern, and then I use grouping to omit it from my result. That's a very, I think, convenient way of handling that problem. There are cases, though, where grouping in this context can be really cumbersome and can actually make the problem sort of intractable. But the key here is what we're really using the grouping for is to omit this prologue and epilogue of our pattern. These are only here to provide context, where I expect my match to occur. I don't really need them themselves as part of my match. So Python offers this thing called look around, which are a combination of something called look ahead and look behind. And it's a way of providing context in your pattern. So here's what I actually want to match, the thing I care about. I want to take out this part of people's first name. All right, so that's this. But in order to match this, just the inside of a first name, to be the inside of a first name, it has to come after a capital letter, and it has to come before a last name. But I don't want those to be part of my match. I just want this part. So Python has this concept of look behind, which is to say, I only want to match a bunch of lowercase letters. That's the thing I actually care about. But I only want to match a bunch of lowercase letters that come after an uppercase letter and come before a last name. So a last name in my definition will be a space followed by a capital letter followed by some other letters. I guess I should allow the possibility somebody's last name is only one letter long, but in this case I'm not. So this is a look behind expression. It says you're only allowed to match if the match is preceded by this. But this will not become part of your match. And this is a look ahead expression. You are only allowed to match if this comes after the match, but this will not be part of the match itself. So I think I've gotten ahead of my slide, but maybe you get the idea. The context that I'm specifying here is because I obviously need the interior of a first name to be preceded by this capital letter. I don't care about the capital letter when I'm replacing the first name with a dot. I just want to take this bit and replace it with a dot. And also notice that I'm using re.sub. I'm saying match the pattern, replace every occurrence you find of the pattern with just a dot, and then there's the string s where I want you to use as input for that. So the look around expressions give me one convenient way out of the problem of having to have context, but not wanting to use grouping. And I have an example of why grouping can be ugly. Before I do that, let's talk about the format of these. So a look behind expression, so something that must occur before your match, but not part of your match, is a sub-expression that begins with this. This is a non-capturing group. It has no impact besides to specify a precondition for a match. A look ahead expression looks like this. I'm not pleased about the asymmetry there. I don't like that this one gets a less than sign and this one doesn't get a greater than sign, but it is what it is. So we could use grouping to achieve this, but the grouping is, in this case, not the worst if you used a grouping alternative, but I have an example where it would be the worst. This is not the grouping alternative. This one is still using the look ahead and look behind. Okay, so here's an example where I'm trying to use groups. What I'm going to do here is, maybe I've never learned about look ahead and look behind. I'll say, what I want to do is I'm going to match the entire name, the first and last. Here's the first initial, and then here is the rest of the first name, and then here is the last name. What I'll do is I'll match all of the parts of the name, and then in my substitution, I will ignore some of those groups. So I'm going to number the groups to make it clear what I'm using. So this will be group 1, this will be group 2, this will be group 3. So first initial, rest of first name, last name. And I'm doing that. Notice that when the match is done, I do get G and then the rest of the first name, then the last name. I get B and then the rest of the first name, then the last name. If I now want to turn this into first initial last name, I can do a substitution where I take the pattern, and then for every instance of the pattern that I see, like this, I replace it with group 1, a dot, and then group 3. I just ignore group number 2. It just gets completely ignored in my substitution. Notice the use of \1 and \3 in my substitution expression. That's one of the reasons knowing group numbering was helpful earlier. The problem with this is almost a solution to the problem. And I mean, it is actually a bit cleaner than look ahead and look behind in some cases, because it's not useful to learn look ahead and look behind if you could do everything this way. I mean, if you already know grouping, you don't have to learn any new things to do something like this. But it's not perfect. And notice what's happening here. So let's scroll through that. The grouping approach I'm using doesn't work with a 3-word name. Now, I could make it work by adding a bunch of extra junk to this expression, but the expression would become pretty much unreadable. So the question then is, okay, why doesn't it work? I mean, match a first initial, the rest of your first name, then a last name. So what's happening is it's matching like this. It's saying, okay, there's my first initial, there's the rest of the first name, there's my last name. And the problem is it can't do that again for this 2-word sequence, because remember how find all works with non-overlapping matches. So this is now a match of the pattern. Let me see if I can draw my line straight. This whole thing here is now a match of the pattern, which means it can't go looking for a match like this. That's not allowed. That would be an overlapping match. And so it doesn't. It just leaves the word Presley completely out. It doesn't get matched ever. And so, as far as the pattern is concerned, this is working correctly. First initial, rest of first name, last name, get rid of the rest of the first name and do the abbreviation. What we want is to perform this substitution on every instance of a first name. And so what does it mean to be a first name? Well, let's see. If it's a name that's followed by any other name, then it is not a last name, so we should abbreviate it. Okay, but we can't do that with our grouping approach because of this issue with overlapping matches. But we can do it with look ahead and look behind, because look ahead and look behind don't have the same overlapping properties, because we know that if I work with look ahead and look behind, this part, the look behind expression, isn't part of my match. This part, the look ahead expression, is also not part of my match. So as far as non-overlapping matches, the contribution of these things isn't considered at all. So if I fast forward back through this, and I take a look at what happens with here we go. If I use look ahead and look behind instead, so I go back to my previous version, here I'm looking for the first, I want to have a first initial that isn't part of my match. My match will be following a first initial, a bunch of lowercase letters, and then after my match, there needs to be a space and a last name. And we notice that it does pull out both of these first names because they don't overlap with each other anymore, because the stuff that actually gets matched, LVIS and ARON, those don't overlap. And now I can just do the very simple substitution I was doing before, and I get the right result.